So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And by the way, the what you see behind me here is not a virtual background. This is actually here. So I'm actually in our shop where our Pikes Peak race car is being worked on right now and is being prepared to do some testing tomorrow. Actually, um, so we thought this would be a great little background to use and timely. So with that, let's just jump right in and give you just a little bit of background about myself and why I got into the Pikes Peak stuff and why I wrote a book. So I've been racing primarily Porsches for about 20 years now. Uh, it's been loads of fun. Love doing it. It did it for many, many years on controlled racetracks and not oval tracks. So we're doing road racing courses that have usually you know 10, 20 corners and left and right turns and uphill and downhill. So lots of variety. Did that for quite a while, had a lot of success at various levels, but never dreamed about doing Pikes Peak. But fast forward to 2011, when a fellow racer came up to me one day and said, they're just finishing paving Pikes Peak. And you could probably do pretty well up there. I encourage you to give it a shot. And I honestly had never thought it was even something I could even ponder until that moment. But he planted a seed, and I'm glad to say that I did it for the first time in 2012, which was the first year that the mountain was paved. And I had thought at the time it would be a one-time bucket list type of thing to do it and move on. It's 2021 and I haven't moved on and don't plan on moving on. It's just a fantastic experience in every way. So that's who I am. So, and what's kind of unique about this race is that it combines grassroots amateur drivers like me with full factory teams with professional race car drivers, and so it's kind of cool. It's almost like a dream for an amateur to get to mix it up with the pros and kind of see how you do with them, get to know them, get to meet some interesting folks. It's a lot of fun. So why did I write a book on this? It's a big stretch from racing a race car up the mountain to actually writing about it and researching a lot. But the race kind of got into my blood very, very quickly. I got a real appreciation for the history behind this and the importance of this race, really worldwide. And initially, I went to Pikes Peak in 2012, saying that I was going to be the most prepared driver in the history of this race. So I said, I'm going to do everything I can. I'm going to do as many simulations of a run up Pikes Peak as I can. I drove up and down it at legal speeds in a road car hundreds of times. Took video of one of my heroes of the hill climb is a gentleman by the name of Monster Tajima, who won it many, many times out of Japan. And I thought his driving was just sublime to watch. And so I studied how he approached the entire course, all 156 corners, and did my best to emulate and learn from the way he was driving it. So anyway, thought I was super prepared. I learned in my very first practice run in the very first year that I was not. And that's what this picture is, actually. When you see this picture here, all that smoke trailing out behind the car is because I've locked all four tires up in a panic stop, trying not to go off the side of the mountain in the very first time that I went up there. So that was very, very humbling. And I learned in a hurry that Pikes Peak at 100 plus miles an hour is very different from Pikes Peak at 10 or 20 miles an hour in a passenger car. So I thought, my original thought for this book was, let's write a guide for future racers so that they don't make the same mistakes I made and they're better prepared. Fast forward to now, and when we published the book, that's not at all what the book ended up being, but that was the start of it. But it ended up being far more interesting and I think far more exciting than that, with capturing a lot of the history of the race. I worked a lot with the Pikes Peak Library District on that, getting some wonderful photography from a great collection of photographers who have been up the mountain throughout the years. And this, if you've driven up Pikes Peak, this is one of those beautiful drives you can take. And as Monster Tajima always liked to say from Japan, this is the most beautiful race course in the world. And I certainly wouldn't argue with that. So it ended up being a book about, stories about Pikes Peak, the history of it, talking to various racers who had raced it, a little bit of my story in there, but mostly other people. And I thought that was far more interesting, and I think it's panned out pretty well. So, just a little background here. A lot of people don't realize that vehicles have been going up Pikes Peak for a long, long time. There was a carriage road originally that was built back in the 19th century, and it literally was a carriage road. It was a road for carriages drawn up the mountain by animals. And as you can see in this picture, it was in most cases a couple of ruts where the wheels would go. The animals would pull these carriages up to the summit of Pikes Peak, and it would be a great draw for tourists. In 1901, a couple of gentlemen who are pictured here out of Denver, Mr. Yount and Mr. Felker, decided they had a horseless carriage and that they would try to take it up this carriage road and see if they could get to the summit of Pikes Peak. Keep in mind, again, 1901, and think about what cars were like in 1901. Here's another picture up above tree line. It gets even hairier, and this is them going up there with snow and everything, and then just a tiny little trail going up the side, and then sheer drop-offs. This vehicle had all of 3.5 horsepower. It was actually powered by steam, which was a popular means of propulsion for early motor cars. And that's what they used for this. And if you think about the kind of torque that steam can give a vehicle, think about steam engines, the amount of torque that they have. This actually was not such a bad idea to take a steam-driven car up Pikes Peak. With all that torque, the 3.5 horsepower was kind of irrelevant, but it had the power to get up the grades that you encounter going up there. The good news is they made it up to the summit. It took them 24 hours, but through dogged determination and it's just a pioneering spirit, they made it up to the mountain, up to the summit of the mountain, and set history as the first horseless carriage or powered vehicle to make it up to the summit of Pikes Peak. Again, that was 1901. So we fast forward into the teens, and a gentleman who a lot of us are probably familiar with in the Pikes Peak region, Spencer Penrose, founder of the Broadmoor and many other things in the area, decided that carriage road was not really suitable for motorized vehicles to go up. And by the time you got to the 1910s, there were a lot more motor vehicles around, and it was something that people would like to do. He also, being an entrepreneur, saw a business opportunity in that he could charge a toll. If he built the highway, he could charge a toll for people to go up the highway and enjoy these wonderful views. And maybe it would draw more people to the Pikes Peak region, make it more of a tourist attraction. And hey, if they stayed in the Broadmoor Hotel, all that much better. So he invested an enormous amount of time and money into converting that. You saw what that carriage road looked like, converting it into an actual highway. And you can see it, the difference is dramatic. It's broad, it's smooth, it's safe. It's what you would actually consider going up in a car, even though, again, it was a dirt road for most of its history, except for just the last 9 years or so. So he did that. He had construction vehicles specifically constructed to build this highway. So these were custom trucks. And again, this is 1915 when they were building, kind of wrapping up the construction of the highway. Very impressive that they were able to do this at all and do such a fantastic job of building it. But it by and large follows the original path of the carriage road up to the top of Pikes Peak. a lot of people say, okay, yeah, I know the highway was built by Spencer Penrose over 100 years ago, but you know, was the race something that came along quite a bit later? And the answer is no. The race actually was a thought of Spencer Penrose immediately when he was building the highway. He said, how better to promote this highway and realize a return on his investment and get people out to the Pikes Peak region than to hold a race. So he announced that in the first year of operation of the highway, there would be a hill climbing contest to the summit of Pikes Peak. He specifically invited a lot of the greatest race car drivers from around the world to come in and compete for a very expensive trophy. You can see the picture of it here that he himself commissioned and paid for. And it worked. It was a great promotional tool. The Pikes Peak Highway became world famous overnight and has remained so to this day. So what a brilliant idea and a great way to make something that you've spent a lot of money, a lot of time building world famous overnight. So, they had the early races. Boy, talk about daredevils. They didn't have things like seatbelts, airbags, anything like that. None of the safety things or even doors, things like that. A lot of these cars, you can see they were totally open cockpit. If you slid off the seat, which you could easily do, you would be exiting the vehicle. So a lot of bravery, but it made the reputation of the race really quickly by people seeing pictures like this of daredevils driving at breakneck speeds up to the summit of Pikes Peak. His whole notion of bringing the best of the motorsports world to Pikes Peak has persisted for over 100 years. That this race has drawn pretty much a who's who of motorsports to Pikes Peak every year. It's kind of a rite of passage. If you haven't run up Pikes Peak and you're a race car driver, you probably want to in most cases. And so its list of champions is literally a who's who of motorsports. It's just amazing. And you just see a few of the luminaries who have raced up here in the last century. So just a few statistics. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you have driven up the Pikes Peak Highway before. If not, hopefully you'll want to after seeing this. But it's a little over 12 and a half miles from the start line up to the summit. The whole Pikes Peak Highway is quite a bit longer than that, but the start line falls just above the reservoirs, which are partway up the mountain. So in the race, throughout its 100-year history or so, has always been the same length. The finish line has moved around a little bit, but they've adjusted the start line as they adjusted the finish line. So it's always been 12.42 miles. It's always been 156 turns, and it's always ended on the summit. And it's almost a 5,000 foot gain of elevation going up the mountain. So that's a major challenge for man and machine to go up that much elevation in such a short period of time. And you can see, in order to get that much elevation gain so quickly, you have an average of a 7% grade all the way up there, sometimes up to 10%, which is quite steep. You'll see the final thing I've got on this slide, and with this beautiful picture behind it, I've got guardrails with a little question mark on it. And you'll notice on the lower left, you'll see there's a guardrail on that turn there. Some of the other ones, there's one more down below there, but you'll see, there are guardrails, and a lot of people will say, well, now that it's paved and there are guardrails, it should be a lot safer than it used to be when it was a dirt road with no guardrails. And I've got a funny story about that a few years ago when I was racing and spending some time in the old Summit House up on the summit, sat down next to another racer who had completed his run, and I asked him what he did for a living. And he said, well, I built guardrails, put them all over the place. And he said, in fact, I did the guardrails on this highway. So I said, well, that's fantastic, but I've got a beef with you. And he said, oh, what? He said, whenever I gauge my braking wrong, which in practice, I will often do because, we're all trying to test the limits of the road and our brakes and the car. If I get it a little bit late, the guardrail is never there to catch me. As I'm going up and I'm jamming the brakes on, the guardrail is kind of over to my right, and it's not going to stop me from going off the edge. And he said, well, that's a very good reason for that. He said, the guardrails are not built to catch the race cars going up the mountain. They're meant to catch passenger cars going down the mountain. And so you'll notice, and this picture is a perfect illustration. You see how the guardrail's on the downhill side of the corner. And that's the case on pretty much all the turns where you see guardrails. And we're going up at breakneck speed. So you can see if we were to miss our braking point, that guardrail wouldn't catch us in most cases. So I thought that was a funny story about the whole guardrail thing. And it's something to notice next time you go up Pikes Peak and you look at those guardrails. Just remember, they're not all that helpful to those of us in race cars, but hopefully they catch some people who have brake failure or brain failure on the way down due to lack of oxygen, perhaps, or too many donuts at the summit. So 156 turns, that's a lot. Road racers are used to tracks that have 10 to 20 turns. This has 156. So how in the world do we digest all that? And the answer is in 3 portions. We have a lower section, a middle section, and an upper section that we break the course down into. It makes it much easier for us as drivers to break it down and learn a section at a time. And then you only have 60-ish turns to memorize at a time. And then you piece them all together. And before you know it, you're at the summit. So this kind of gives you the character of the course from the start line at 9,390 feet up to the end of the first section, which is just below Glen Cove, which is an area, if you drive up there, there's a little gift shop there on the left-hand side, a little parking area, very pleasant area to stop and take a breather and enjoy the scenery. So that's our lower third of the mountain. That's where we qualify for the race. So it's very important to get that section right. And it's a lot of fun. You're going through the trees. Having the trees right next to the road, to me, gives a greater sensation of speed than any other part of the mountain. So even though it may not be the fastest part, it feels like it's the fastest part, as you have these trees whizzing past you down on the bottom section. Then in the middle section, this goes from Glen Cove up to Devil's Playground, and it looks really short, right? And it doesn't look like a lot of turns. It's 30 turns. How hard could that be? Well, it's very, very vertical. This is a section that's called the W's. And if you look at the map here, you can see why. You can see there's a couple of places where the road is shaped like W's. If you see that around where turn 96 is there, that's one of the W's. And then around turn 102 through 106, that's another one of the W's there. And so there's switchbacks. That's how you get up the mountain in a hurry. So that's the middle section. And then the very top section, you'll see it's not nearly as twisty. This is all above tree line. And you'll see the curves are nice and gentle. Looks much simpler, right? Should be safer. Not really. Part of the charm of Pikes Peak is this is the fast part. This is the really, really fast part of Pikes Peak, is up above Devil's Playground. Because these turns are nice and gentle, we can get the race cars going incredibly fast. The downside is this is above tree line. So if you go off the road, we like to say that's the shortcut to Cripple Creek. That you're going to go down in a hurry and go down thousands of feet in just a few seconds. So this is not somewhere you want to make mistakes either, but this is where you make up a lot of time. So those are the 3 sections. Just moving on kind of from the road to some of the people involved here. I was lucky enough to get to know and work with Bobby Unser, who we just lost a couple months ago, unfortunately, but one of the great legends of Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak for a long time and still is known as Unsers Mountain. It's not just because Bobby, but it started with his uncle Louie, who is absolutely dominant on Pikes Peak for many, many years, until really Bobby came along in the 60s. And Bobby's whole mission kind of in life was to win more races on Pikes Peak than his uncle Bobby did. He succeeded in this. He has 13 overall and class wins, most of those being overall wins, which is incredibly impressive and why they really call this Unser Mountain in a lot of cases. Um, and what he likes to say, a lot of people around the world know Bobby better for his IndyCar career. The fact that he won Indy 500 3 times, incredibly impressive. Not duplicated very many times. The most anybody has won is 4, and that's very select company, as is 3. And he says, and he insists that his whole IndyCar career and all these IndyCar wins, Indy 500 wins, would never have happened without Pikes Peak. That kind of like me, where I didn't even have Pikes Peak on my radar. He didn't have Indy on his radar at all until one year, a gentleman by the name of Parnelli Jones came and raced with Bobby up on Pikes Peak and noticed the kind of talent that Bobby had. And he said, Bobby, I'm going to get you a test at Indianapolis. And Bobby said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm not really up to that. I have no desire to do that. It's very nice of you to say that, but nope, that's not what I'm going to do. Well, Parnelli wouldn't take no for an answer. And so 2 or 3 months later, he called Bobby back and said, I've got your test all set up. Be at Indianapolis on this day, and you're going to be testing an Indy car. And fast forward, the rest is history. Bobby showed his talent there and went on to an incredible career in IndyCar and so many other forms of racing. So amazing guy. I mentioned Bobby's uncle Louie. This is one of my favorite pictures of Uncle Louie. This is the old Summit House. So the Summit House they're just tearing down now in preparation for the opening just in a couple of weeks of the new Summit House was preceded by this one, kind of on the other side of the summit. This is actually not too far from where the new Summit House is. It's just kind of across. If you see where that stick is sticking up, that's around where the new Summit House is being built. And so it had this little kink at the end where you had to go around the Summit House, and they had the finish line at the front door of the Summit House. You can see it's a Longines timing banner up at the Summit House. And what's interesting about this photo is you'll notice Uncle Louie is going backwards across the finish line. So, of course, when I talked with Bobby, I said, you got to tell me the story behind this photo. And he said, what's amazing about this photo, not just the fact that he's going backwards, he said, so Uncle Louie had a fantastic run as usual going up Pikes Peak, and he spun the car on the very last corner. He figured the quickest way to get across the finish line was not to spin it back around, and there may have, in fact, not have been room to do that. He said he would just put it in reverse and go as fast as he can. You can see the speed based on the rooster tail going backwards off of the rear tire here. So he got across the finish line. He finished. And I asked Bobby, I said, how long do you think it would have taken to get that car into reverse, get it across there? How much time did he lose? He said, at least 20 seconds is what he would have lost by doing that. And that was kind of the end of the story. As I was researching the book and putting this story in the book, I said, let's take a look at how did Uncle Louie finish? Did he still win, or what happened? I looked in the record books, and this year that this happened, he lost by all of 11 seconds. So he would have won the race if he hadn't spun it at the summit. So really amazing story. Louie Jr. was one of Bobby's brothers, and he primarily competed in the stock car division. And this is him. This is my favorite all-time photo from the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. I think it's amazing. And I'm told that this is the way Louie Jr. drove all the time. Right on the hairy edge. You can see how close that rear tire is to going over the edge. And I know this corner very well. This is many hundreds of feet down, maybe even 1,000. I don't know. It's a long way down if you miss that corner. But this was the trick to winning, is pushing it right to the very edge. And clearly that's what Louie would do. And one of Bobby's great stories here, and Bobby, by the way, is the greatest storyteller I've ever met in my life. And I've met a lot of really good storytellers, but he's the king. But he said, one time I'm riding down the mountain with Louie. I reached over, shut the car off, and got out. And I told him, I'm not going to ride with you. You're crazy. Which, here's photographic evidence, I guess. If he drove like that going up, apparently he drove the same way going down. And if Bobby thought he was crazy, man, that's amazing. A lot of people aren't aware of the fact that Mario Andretti raced up on Pikes Peak 3 times. His last time was 1969, and he won the race overall. The same year, he won the Indy 500, his only Indy 500 win. And I was lucky enough to work with Mario on the book as well, and talk to him. And he said, after winning that race, I swore that I would never return. I said he had to take just way too many risks to win. Everything just had to happen perfectly. It was just too dangerous. And he knew he had nothing to gain by coming back and trying again. And you can see the car that he was driving is just nuts. This actually is a car he ran maybe in 67 or 68. This is not the 69 car, but it's a monster nevertheless. And so I thought that was really telling. Fast forward to some of the modern racers who are one who's still racing today up there and has raced for decades. Paul Dallenbach's an interesting guy because he raced on it when it was full dirt, when it was a hybrid course between partially dirt, partially paved, and then fully paved. He's continued to race on it. So Paul is one of the few people who can give you a good perspective of how the race has evolved over the years. And one of his great quotes when I've talked to him about the race is, he said, this is great because it's one of the only races that's left where you can literally dream something up on a napkin, compete on a grassroots level with the factory teams, and still be able to do that. And, he says, Indy used to be that way, but it hasn't been that way for a long time. There's a lot of other legendary races that were that way, that you could, think of something, build it, go and race it, and compete with everybody else. Pikes Peak is a throwback in a lot of ways, and this is one of the ways that it's a real throwback, is that it still encourages that. So thought that was interesting. Among modern day competitors, Aaron Kaufman, who some of you may recognize from television. He's hosted a couple different series on television, and he's an amazing guy, real fan of the race, and a very deep thinker. And his quote here that I love is that he says, in racing, there are real consequences to your, get this out of the way here, to your decisions, and race cars don't give you a pass. And he said, that's a great lesson. He went on to say that he wishes more kids would get into racing because it teaches them so many lessons about things like responsibility, consequences of your actions, teamwork, good behavior, that sort of thing. So just amazing. The all-time record holder on Pikes Peak is a gentleman named Romain Dumas, who came up with he's raced many, many times. He's racing again this year, but the craziest car that he came up with was a few years ago in a Volkswagen-sponsored electric vehicle, the IDR. And he says, after Le Mans or Pikes Peak, you've got Formula One in Monaco, Indianapolis, maybe the Paris-Dakar or Monte Carlo Rally, but in terms of top shelf motorsports events, in his opinion, those are kind of it. So in his eyes, and in a lot of racers' eyes and fans' eyes, Pikes Peak is one of the very, very top events in the world. So little picture of what are the cars and trucks and other vehicles like that go up Pikes Peak. This is a montage of several different vehicles. The reason I chose these particular ones is it illustrates a common thread among all of the vehicles. That really, most of the vehicles that go up Pikes Peak have this common thread. And what it is, you'll notice they've all got these big wings on them, some on the front and on the back, but at least on the back. And the reason for this, remember when I was talking about the course and the upper part of it being very high speed and very high altitude. High altitude means low air density, which means that it's tougher to glue the car down to the road using these wings. So you need much bigger wings, more aggressive angles, bigger surface area than you would with a traditional race car. So again, next time you're looking at pictures of Pikes Peak cars, look at the front and back of them and look at the size of the wings and different aero stuff they have on them. It's pretty amazing. All right, so just real quickly, there's so many great stories, and captured a lot of these in the book, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail. There's one competitor who's a legendary competitor on Pikes Peak as well, who actually stole a van to make it up to practice. That he showed up late to practice, couldn't get through the toll gate because there was nobody there, saw a van sitting there, stole it, drove it up to the start line, had a crew member drive it back down, and he got busted. He almost got kicked out of the race, but for some reason, they allowed him to race. He got out of it. This guy is great at getting out of things. And the gentleman's name is Bruce Canepa. Amazing guy. Again, it was privileged to be able to work with him on the book as well. And he also drove open wheel cars. And you'll see this photo is of one of his open wheel cars he raced up Pikes Peak with all this road rash on the front of it. And I asked him, how is that possible? On Pikes Peak, you're not following a car up. How did you get all these stone chips on the front of the car? And he said, well, one year we finished a practice run. I was up there with a couple of the Unser boys, and we decided we'd race down. And so they raced down the mountain, passing each other, having a grand old time until they got to back to the start line, and they were called into the officials' hut and read the riot act, told that they were going to be kicked out. Of course, they didn't end up getting kicked out. And Bruce says, I said, you've got a habit of getting out of sticky situations. Why'd you get out of this one? He said, well, the only reason was the other two people I was doing this with had the last name of Unser. And so he was able to escape. They didn't want to punish the Unsers. And Bruce was, a co-conspirator. So he got out of it. So that's pretty cool. One of the other modern drivers, if you take a look at YouTube and look at Climb Dance, you'll see an amazing video of Mr. Viton and racing. It was 800 or 900 horsepower Peugeot 208, I believe is what it was. I can't remember the model number offhand, but up Pikes Peak. This is a World Rally car that was specifically modified for Pikes Peak. And he was famous for coming around a couple of corners and going like this to shield himself from the sun. Which is normal. We all have to do that actually, because we're practicing at dawn. But his favorite quote is, "You can raise your hand, but never lift your foot." And that would be why he's a winner on Pikes Peak as well. One of the interesting themes that I uncovered in my research for the book was a lot of the racers who have had a lot of success on Pikes Peak have a common fear. And that fear, believe it or not, is a fear of heights. Which seems strange, doesn't it? It's like somebody having a fear of snakes and being a snake handler. But nevertheless, a lot of these people confront their fear head on by racing up Pikes Peak with all these sheer drops and do rather well despite their innate fear of heights. So I thought that was very interesting. And just to wrap it up real quick, my kind of personal story here. Competed on Pikes Peak many times with an internal combustion powered portion, this one. However, we made the decision a few years ago to convert it to electric. I got a very fortuitous call from a guy out in California who has become a good friend over the years. And he noticed something online about me competing the car was originally a Porsche 912 and competing on Pikes Peak in this car. And he said, "Hey, I've built a 912 and I've converted it to electric. Wouldn't it be interesting if we did the same thing to your car and we're able to really prove a point that electric is the way to go?" And electric cars have been racing up Pikes Peak for about 35 years now, believe it or not. But the technology lately has become such that it's really the logical choice, and it's becoming more and more difficult for internal combustion cars to beat electric cars. It still does happen, but electric has the all-time record, and it's pretty tough to beat. It doesn't care about the lack of oxygen at the top of the mountain. It doesn't care about things like breathing. That's not a problem, and the torque is there all the time. So it's a fantastic combination. And so there's what the car looks like. You can see it behind me as well. When we go up there, the conditions can be interesting. There's a ton of snow. I'm sure there is right now. When we first raced the car in electric configuration in 2019, we did that with a 6-motor configuration. You can see that here. Each one of the things with the cooling fins on them are motors. Each one of those is from a Zero motorcycle, electric motorcycle. And we've since evolved this to an 8-motor configuration. And that's our plan for next year, for 2022, is to run the car in an 8-motor electric configuration up Pikes Peak. That requires a lot of battery. And so you've got 2 giant batteries in the passenger compartment here. So they are my passengers, along with the stuffed marmot. And that's another story. And a couple more in the front. And so in keeping with the schedule here, I was going to try to keep this to 40 minutes, and I think we're right at 40 minutes. So that's the end of kind of my formal talk. The book, if you enjoyed the talk, feel free to pick up a copy of the book. It's I believe it's available at the Pioneers Museum bookstore, the gift shop. It's also available online at peakofracing.com or Amazon. You can find it wherever if you just look it up. And I think that's about it. And Diane, if we want to open the floor to any questions, we've got plenty of time if we'd like to field any questions from anybody in the audience.
Yes, thank you so much, Chris. And I think I have a question about the marmot, but we'll just open the floor now and see. Please put your questions in the chat. So from Eric Schwab, Chris, will your book be for sale in the new Summit complex?
That's a great question. It remains to be seen. The Summit complex hasn't opened yet. And so, but I've been in discussions with them. So on day one, no, it will not be, but we're working on making it available up there. It's a natural place. So great question. But in the interim, you can get it at peakofracing.com, the Pioneers Museum. There's several places you can find it. But yes, we do hope that it will be available on the Summit House soon.
Wonderful. Any other questions?
While people are pondering that, I can answer your marmot question, Diane.
Yes, please do.
So that cute little guy who's my passenger in the car is there because a couple of years ago, again, if you've driven up Pikes Peak, you've probably seen marmots up there, right? It's kind of infested with them up there. There really aren't any natural predators to them up that high, and so they thrive up there, and they can find enough food to eat and stuff. The problem is they're not too smart, and they're used to cars going up there at 10 miles an hour, and they have plenty of time to get out of the way. They're not used to crazy people like me going up at unlimited speeds up there. So we're always trying to dodge the marmots. None of us want to hit a marmot. I'm a real animal lover, but in one of my practice runs right up near the summit, I come around a corner at Cog Cut, actually, which is maybe 4 or 5 turns from the end, and there's this marmot right in the middle of the road. And so I said, okay, that's right where I would want to drive, but I'm not going to do that. I'll move to the outside. So I move to the outside, and then he moves across a little more to the outside, and I move more to the outside, and I get to the point where I'm almost going to drive off the side of the mountain, and this is as far as I can go. And the guy just ran into the side of the car. I didn't actually hit him. He was over to the side. For some reason, he committed suicide by race car. I don't know. And I felt terrible about it. I talked later to an official of the race who was up there, and he said, I thought you were going to kill yourself in favor of the marmot. And I said, well, I did everything I could to save the guy, and I just couldn't save him. So I had this, this is actually a golf head cover that was a marmot. And I said, in memory of the fallen marmot, from now on, I'm going to have one of his brethren ride up with me in the race car. And so that's why he's there. He's always a big hit when we could do Fan Fest, which unfortunately is not going to happen this year, but hopefully next year it will. We love to let kids get in the car and pet the marmot, and he squeaks if you squeeze him and stuff like that. So he's always a hit. So we turned a negative into a positive, I guess, there.
Thank you for sharing. And some others have actually added questions. So from Nathan, how many drivers are using the simulator to practice? And is there a sim platform that gets the track more than others?
What a fantastic question. Yeah, thanks for that, Nathan. So a lot of drivers do use the simulator. It has some real value, particularly for those who aren't as lucky as I am to live right here and be able to drive it in person. If you're coming from overseas or hundreds or thousands of miles away, you can use the simulator to learn at least where the turns go on the track. I can tell you, I've personally driven sims, yeah, I think it's useful for learning what direction the turns go in. To me, doing it in real life, the simulators all fall a little bit short, but it's a good training tool for, kind of where it goes in terms of, how fast could you take each corner and that sort of thing. That varies so much day by day. I can tell you, having raced up there for the last 8 years, it's every run you do up there is different, and so the simulator could perhaps encourage some dangerous habits up there. It can't really simulate all that. So yeah, useful to a certain degree, but limited for Pikes Peak.
Great. Sandy also has a question. What is the horsepower rating of your electric car?
It's a state secret, unfortunately. I can tell you that in internal combustion, the most we ever got to was around 260 horsepower and pound-feet of torque, which is very, very underpowered for Pikes Peak. I always get, kind of the table stakes for Pikes Peak is, 600, 700 horsepower. There are a lot of cars that go up to like 1,400 horsepower on Pikes Peak. However, we've had the advantage of having a wonderful platform here in the Porsche 911, what's unique about it is having the engine or the motors in the back, is that it can use all of that power because they're hanging over the drive wheels. So it does, and that's really why Porsche has such a great history in motorsports. And so we can use every bit of that power going up there, and we've always kind of been giant killers, beating a lot of cars that had double, triple the horsepower that we had. So it's not all about power; it's about the platform of the car and a lot of other factors. And so that's a very evasive way of saying, actually, we really haven't fully measured the power of the EV platform. Suffice it to say, it's going to be a lot more powerful than it ever was before. And the other advantage is that this 260, let's say it was 260 horsepower before, by the time it got to the summit with the lack of oxygen, it was down to effectively 160 horsepower. Whereas this electric one, let's say it's 1,000 horsepower, 1,000 pound-feet of torque, it's going to be exactly the same at the mountain, at the top of the mountain. So there's definitely some huge advantages. And that's why, EVs are, in my opinion, the way to go for Pikes Peak.
That's interesting. Definitely something to think about with changing between the two. John asks, tell us about practicing in the rain without windshield wipers.
Oh, thank you, John. So, over the years, road racing, I've always liked racing in the rain. I'm one of those kind of crazy people that I actually enjoy racing even more in the rain. And I begged for rain on Pikes Peak every year that I've run up there, primarily because I was in an underpowered car. And I thought, well, that might kind of level the playing field, right? They can't put down all that power when it's wet. So please rain, we'll level the playing field a little bit. So I got my wish in practice back in 2015, 16, can't remember which year it was. And it was pouring the whole morning. And I was just like a kid in a candy store. I loved it. It remains to me one of my favorite memories on Pikes Peak and it was just practice and just on the lower part. And driving up Pikes Peak in the rain is, to me, the ultimate. We had no windshield wipers. That adds weight. So you don't want extra weight on a race car because it's going to slow it down. In hindsight, maybe that was not the place to save weight, because we actually did end up adding a single windshield wiper that very afternoon after that experience, because in a lot of cases, I couldn't see far enough to even see where the turns were or where the braking points were. But fortunately, by that point, I'd raced up Pikes Peak many, many times, and it was all up here. And so I was able to really do it by memory, and I didn't really need to see where the turns were. I knew what turn was coming up, and I could kind of feel what speed I needed to go at. We then got lucky enough in 2019 with the electric powertrain for our first time. It actually rained on race day. Hooray. And again, I was absolutely thrilled. A lot of the other drivers were maybe less so, but I thought, oh, this is going to be so much fun going up there in the rain and sliding around and just having a great time. And it was a huge benefit to us. We had a great result. We finished third place in our division, which was a very tough division with a lot of factory supported vehicles. And I think it was largely because it was in the rain. It leveled the playing field. So yeah, love it.
Great. And Eric asked, thank you, Eric, for asking about the Scholar Series and if it will be available online. Yes, it is recorded. It will be available on the museum's Facebook page and also cspm.org/Scholar Series. So I'll make sure to add that to the chat. Our next question from Jackie, were you racing the day the car went over the cliff at Devil's Playground?
Yes, indeed, I was. And yeah, I know the guy who did that fairly well. He's a wonderful guy. Yeah, I was racing. I've raced up there, almost every year since 2012. And there are always a lot of incidents that take place up there. That's one of the most infamous ones, because again, it was captured on video, which doesn't always happen. It was on race day. And the fact that the car tumbled down so many times down the side of the mountain was just, and then the fact that the driver and navigator, they actually allowed navigators. That was the end of navigators, by the way. That year after that happened, they said, I think we don't want to have navigators in the car anymore. If you don't know the way things go, you probably shouldn't be racing up here. And they don't want any more people to get hurt than absolutely are necessary. So yeah, I was up there. Jeremy's a terrific guy, love him. And he's become kind of famous as a result of it. But yeah, thank goodness he walked away from it, and that's the main thing. If one really interesting thing is, if you want to see the remains of that car, go to the hill climb experience at the Broadmoor in the Penrose Heritage Museum, and you can see the crumpled up remains of that car. It is amazing that he and his teammate walked away from that.
Oh, that's an intense story. Thank you for sharing. So Sandy asks, have there been any female drivers?
Yes. Yeah. And that's been a great thing. There's been a rich history of female drivers on Pikes Peak, including actually the very first person to drive an electric vehicle up Pikes Peak was a woman. And this was back in the 80s. So talk about pioneering. Unbelievable. There's also, you remember the picture I showed of Ari Vitonen in that Peugeot, another legendary rally driver named Michel Mouton from Europe came over, from France as well, came over and raced up Pikes Peak in a very similar car and won. There's been many examples over the years. I wish we had more, honestly. And even though it's, motorsports in general, there aren't as many women in it as there should be. I think there should be. And honestly, I think they'd show the guys a thing or two, and they do in a lot of cases. I do a lot of driver coaching on the side. And I love coaching women. Women are, and sorry guys, but women are more coachable than men in a race car. I think they have some built-in advantages over us. I think that's going to really show as we get more and more women in motorsports and hopefully on the mountain. One of the other great drivers who I worked with on the book was Jerry Unser, who's Bobby's daughter, who's also a past Pikes Peak champion, a terrific woman, a terrific driver. So there's lots of examples, but we should absolutely have more, because you guys would kick our butts, and I look forward to seeing that.
So Kevin asked, have you raced in any other hill climbs?
Oh, that's a great question. I have not raced in any other hill climbs. I've done a lot of racing on a lot of different racetracks, but no other hill climbs. I would love to try some other hill climbs. However, having said that, Pikes Peak is known as the granddaddy of hill climbs. There is no other hill climb quite like it in terms of the length. Hill climbing really started over in England, believe it or not. And you think about, well, England, hill climbs, they don't have any big mountains, but they do have hills. And that's why it's called a hill climb and not a mountain climb, is it actually came out of the British practice of hill climbing. It's still quite popular over there, but most hill climbs over in the UK and frankly over here or anywhere else are very short. They're 10 or 20 turns. They're a minute, maybe 2 minutes long. They're a great test of driver skill and loads of fun, but Pikes Peak takes it and blows it up like 10 times as big as any, as your typical hill climb. And so, and I always wondered that, honestly. It's like, why did they call it a hill climb? It's going up a mountain. It's not going up a hill. It's because that's just the style of racing has always been going up hills. And then, Spencer Penrose said, let's do it up a mountain.
John asks, do you think motorcycles will ever race again on Pikes Peak?
Oh, what a great question. The honest answer is I don't know. I think it's in the current environment, I think it's very dangerous. It's always been very dangerous. Again, I'm a car guy. I like having a steel cage around me. It's still dangerous having a steel cage around me, but at least I've got that if I go off the side. On a bike, of course, there's nothing other than the clothing that you're wearing in the helmet. So part of the problem is that over the years since the entire highway was paved, on the upper portion of the highway, there's been major problems with frost heaves. And if you've even driven a passenger car up there, you'll notice it's like you're riding the high seas as you're going up there. But at 10 miles an hour in a passenger car that's got soft springs and all that, it's a minor irritation. In a race car, or even worse on a bike, it actually sends the vehicle airborne at times. In fact, typically in this car, it will lose contact with the road 3 or 4 times on the way up the mountain. That's bad enough in a car. On a bike, that's just so dangerous. And so, I've got massive respect for the guys who have done that on a bike. I think in order for bikes to go back there, that's what needs to be corrected. I think the best way to correct it would be to completely tear up and redo the whole upper third of that of the road, which is very expensive, very time consuming. It would shut down the highway to and it's a toll highway, right? It's got to be open 364 days a year. So it's a big ask to do that for those of us who like to use the highway one day a year for a race. So I would love to see the bike guys back. They're fantastic. A lot of them are friends, but I think that the best way to address it is to repave the whole top part of it. But I'm not sure I see that happening. But that's for people smarter than me who are on the board of the hill climb, and maybe they'll come up with a more innovative way to bring the bikes back.
Thank you. And Eric shared about Annie Brokow, who rode a motorcycle in the 1997 hill climb at the age of 61, first woman to enter the race to the clouds. Thank you, Eric, for sharing that. And then we have another question from Kevin. What is your sleep schedule for race week, given the very early start times for the practice days and race days? Ooh.
Awesome question. The answer is there's very little sleep the whole week of the race. And and that's a misconception. A lot of people say, well, it's just like one run up the mountain. So it's like a sprint race. You're hardly doing anything in the race car. Not true. It's almost like an endurance race because you're actually practicing. We normally book 4 what they call tire testing days early in the month. In fact, today is one of those for this year. So if I was competing this year, I would be on the mountain. I would have been on the mountain earlier today. So last weekend and this weekend were both tire testing weekends. So that's 4 days there. And then on race week, you practice Tuesday through Friday. Then you do Fan Fest the night of Friday night. And again, those Tuesday through Friday, my alarm clock is typically set for 1 or 1:30 in the morning. And because I'm going to be getting in a race car the next morning, I normally can't sleep. I'm just maybe drift off about midnight. So you get almost no sleep. You get up there and you have to be ready to go right away at dawn. And then you come back down and do it again. And by the time you get to race day on a Sunday, again, we actually typically don't sleep at all in our beds on race day, we'll drive up the mountain at about 1:30 in the morning, and I normally sleep in the back of my truck, and try to get a few hours of sleep so that I can again try to perform at my best in the race. But I've never felt tired in the race car. As soon as I belt myself in there, I'm a new person. I'm energized. I have a lot of techniques that I do use to be, mentally focused and able to do this in a safe and fast way. So I do have some things that I use that are tricks to do that. But yeah, the sleep is virtually non-existent for that week.
I was going to say I could only imagine, but I don't think I can. John asks, do you follow any particular fitness regimen to prep for the race?
Yes, excellent question. So it's physical as well as mental fitness. Both, well, I was going to say equally important. I think the mental part is even more important. First of all, you have to be physically fit enough to be able to be in a race car with your heart beating at ridiculous rates and going up to where there isn't enough oxygen really to feed your body in general, your brain, your heart, your lungs, all that is just everything is kind of stressed. So you have to be in decent shape to do that, and I try to maintain a good level of fitness for that. I still lose on a typical race week. I lose easily 10 pounds that week. It's very physically demanding. Each of those practice mornings, generally in the race car for 3 hours and not out of it. That's a lot of time to be in a race car. I can tell you, it's even being in a race car for 20 minutes is exhausting. But so there's that, and then the like I said, the mental aspect to me is even more important. To be in the right mental frame of mind to approach this and to maximize my performance. Again, a lot of the times I found myself in an underdog kind of role. So I need to get every ounce possible of performance out of myself and out of the car. And I think that's true, true for a lot of us. The one thing that I've actually given into over the last few years is using oxygen. So I didn't do that for a long time. Finally got talked a few years ago into using oxygen, which a lot of the most successful drivers do. And I have to say, I don't think I'd go back to not using oxygen. Not that I can really tell you that I feel different, but I just, having more oxygen feeding your brain, I think is a good thing in a race car.
It would sound like a very good thing. So I think we're going to have our last question from Mary. Is the race being held this year?
It is. So it even was held last year in the middle of the pandemic. Very reduced field, but they did keep it going, which is great. The race has only not run for, I want to say, a total of 6 years, something like that, due to world wars. And so they weren't going to let a little thing like the pandemic stop them last year. It was tough to get enough people, to compete. There were no spectators. There were reduced crews, a lot of rules around what you could and couldn't do, but the race did happen, and it was a great race as usual. This year it is going to happen again. It is still somewhat reduced from what we would normally expect. However, we do have a full complement of spectators up there. Hooray. Racing without spectators is just not the same. So we're thrilled to have spectators back up there. And we have a great selection of competitors as well. There are some that, particularly, if you think about some who would be coming over from overseas travel is still difficult today. So that's some of them have had to withdraw. So there are plenty of our friends we don't see there this year. We hope to see them all next year, but it's still going to be a great race this year, and can't wait to see who wins. It's going to be exciting no matter what.
Well, thank you, Chris, again for joining us for our Sesquicentennial Scholar Series, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As I said before, this lecture will be recorded, so share with everyone. It's going to be on cspm.org/scholar series and on our Facebook. So thank you, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.